Welcome to the Christian Atheist, episode 29, Hegel, the Ugly, part 1. Having presented the good and the bad of Hegel, it is now time for the ugly, a presentation of those philosophers I have called the prescriptive Hegelians. I call them prescriptive by way of contrast with Hegel's own practice of description as a philosophical program. These prescriptive Hegelians share the essence of his philosophy, but depart from it and add to it in many different ways. One of the most important departures is this. They tell us what we should do in this new paradigm, what reality should be, even though their philosophies are usually presented as analytical descriptions. They practice, then, Hegel's ever-present use of structures of self-deception, which we have yet to discuss. Many of these philosophers, and most certainly the postmoderns, would take issue with my designation of them as prescriptive. But let me make my argument. We are now in a position to present the fork in the road in our culture wars over the last 2 centuries. It was Hegel who substituted, as we've said, the immanent absolute, that is his step into pantheism, for the transcendent absolute, the position traditionally taken by God in the West. Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, accepting Hegel's program, saw this step for what it was, a wholesale reordering of everything that held Western civilization together. A sea change of unparalleled magnitude. Nietzsche's death of God was his recognition that in the loss of a transcendent absolute, we are faced by a chaos unprecedented in human history. He rightly saw the moment as both decisive and radical for the West, that Hegel's immanent absolute, reason, must inevitably yield pride of place to other values. Seeking to salvage the absolute authority and unique value of reason from Kant's critique, Hegel ended by demoting reason to one value relative to others, with no transcendent standard by which to order them. Yet human beings always serve a highest value. As Jonathan Haidt observes, we are built on a platform of worship. We, by nature, posit a supreme value. It lights the world for us, enabling us to have a world rather than a series of disconnected experiences. Remove God, the transcendent absolute, and we will substitute something else, something lesser. The history of post-Hegelian philosophy is, in many ways, the history of this process of substitution. The Nazis, following Hegel's own words of praise for the German state and culture, and their own notions of racial superiority, substituted the Third Reich. Fascism is, in this way, perhaps the most clear and direct outplay of Hegel's philosophy in the world of practical politics. From the left, Marx, more subtle, intellectually comprehensive, and ethically concerned, substituted economic justice, that is, the socialist utopia, as the absolute. What many on the right fail to acknowledge is that Marx's critique of capitalism was profoundly religious, even Christian in its import, even as it denies God. Certainly, the history of the church was not friendly to merchants or the profit motive, and both the Old and New Testament's duty to care for the poor and downtrodden is universally appealing from any ethical perspective. Much of the force and appeal of Marx's analysis, both historically and presently, stands upon this moral claim to superiority by socialism. My point here is neither to defend nor to denigrate Marxism, but merely to point out that its focus was moral and thus practical, to prescribe a course of action in this new reality, a highest value in this Hegelian framework. Marx, following Hegel, arrogates not only God's position, but also his judicial authority. All values conceived as absolute call forth action, as all action is intentional, goal-directed. Denying transcendence, he claims the absolute right to legislate moral certitude. This same position will be adopted again and again by the prescriptive Hegelians. Admittedly, Marx also made the claim, following Hegel, that the progress of history required the overthrow of capitalism. It was for Marx a foregone conclusion. The socialist utopia will come. That is, it does not depend upon human action in the sense of ethical choice, real freedom on the part of human beings. The world is determined by the economic conditions, says Marx, and human beings are simply the cogs in the machine that will bring about this historical inevitability. This is a consequence of the collectivism engendered by Hegel's process metaphysics, as we've seen in previous episodes. The contradiction between the active advocacy of socialism on Marx's part, the prescription, and this metaphysical determinism never seemed to bother him, just as contradiction does not seem to bother the entire tradition of prescriptive Hegelianism. It is Hegel's logic, after all, that formed the superstructure of Marx's system. So contradiction is not a problem, but rather the engine of progress. This embrace of contradiction is one of the hallmarks of all that follows. And, however surprising it may sound, I do not find this acceptance of contradiction entirely wrong, as it points to the truth of Kant's analysis on the limits of rationality. When Kant made it clear that human reason is fundamentally limited in its ability to grasp truth, Hegel objected and sought, by denying the transcendent, to salvage the clarity of insight promised by the enlightenment of absolute knowledge. The results have been a mixed bag. Fruitful on one hand, tragic, even catastrophic on the other. Kant offered balance. Leaving to science the realm of empirical realism, he preserved all the power and insight of scientific inquiry, the Enlightenment's great gift to us. His transcendental idealism preserved a realm of speculative explanation and free inquiry, the realm of faith, preserving for humanity the possibility of freedom, ethics, imagination, and transcendent possibility, including transcendent value. Kant crowned the Enlightenment by enshrining reason as man's greatest faculty, while at the same time preserving for reason a link to the transcendent in faith, maintaining truth, value, freedom, and ethics. Kant carved out conceptual space for all of humanity's exceptional, indeed rational, capacities, for music and poetry, imagination and emotion, religion and science, psychology and philosophy. The cost? In Kant, transcendent knowledge is denied. But what is lost to knowledge is open to reason as possible in faith. We cannot know we are free, but we can believe it, act as if we know it, and still be rational. Human freedom can neither be affirmed nor denied, but it can be believed. The test, then, of such postulates is the test of life, of experience. The Enlightenment project loses only its hubristic claims to certainty, to determinism, to absolute knowledge. It is this Western conception that was embodied in the capitalist West, which was the common enemy of both Hegelian right and left. These right and left Hegelians, despite their antagonisms, were far more aligned with each other than with their common enemy. I stand with Kant and the West. It is worth noting that transcendence need not have a theistic flavor, but in Kant can mean that there is an objective order of truth and reality, and that we can asymptotically approach that truth, that reality, even if we cannot fully know it. Hegel's strategic denial of transcendence, by contrast, restores absolute knowledge to reason, but at the cost of ethics, truth with a capital T, and logic. One might even say reality itself, an argument that will have to wait until our next episode. A cost, I argue, that we have yet to fully calculate, which we are, even today, still incurring, and about which we are seldom, if ever, honest. Inexorable consequences flowed from Hegel's denial of transcendence, and it is in Marx that those consequences begin. Marx's dialectical materialism stood on two justifications, both of which are prescriptions in the relevant sense. First, capitalism would self-destruct from internal contradiction as the capitalists exploited their workforce, impoverishing them into an ever-increasing misery and leading to an inevitable revolution. Following this inevitable revolution, socialism would prove superior in producing and distributing wealth, the promised utopia. Second, socialism is ethically superior, as it is not based on a profit motive, but on an ethic of social justice. This is the positive formulation. Negatively, capitalism, Marx asserts, is a moral horror that must not be tolerated. Almost the entirety of Marx's considerable output is devoted to making this case. Both justifications for socialism had their trial in the crucible of the 20th century. In both cases, the predictions, the expectations, the very moral pretext for socialism's superiority have not only been disproven, but shown to be precisely opposite to what Marx predicted. The people of the West prospered, while those murderous regimes, both right and left, opposed as all of them were to the classically liberal vision, displayed the superiority of that society on the basis of their own benchmarks. Socialism, in all its 20th century incarnations, was brutally murderous and repressive to its own people, and economically failed to meet the most basic standards of civilized countries, not even being able to feed their own people. The statistics are staggering, even if they are seldom reported or taught in our schools. Ask a school child today about totalitarianism in the 20th century, and they will rightly tell you the horrors and evils of the Nazis. But for some reason, they know next to nothing about the Marxist horrors, which by far exceed those of the National Socialists. Shame on us. The story of that shame is our next episode. There are countless good sources for statistics on the horrors of 20th century totalitarian regimes. I do not have the time to present those statistics here. Please take the time to view some of them yourself. Here is one of them worth looking at. There are many others. I would also like to suggest Stephen Hicks's Explaining Postmodernism, Chapter 5, The Crisis of Socialism. It is available on YouTube, read by the author, here. I do not personally agree with all of Hicks's analyses or conclusions, but his analytical commentary on the history of socialism is compact and accurate. If this is the first episode of The Christian Atheist you've viewed, please subscribe below to catch up on past episodes and to be certain not to miss upcoming episodes. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.